Paul, nice meeting you, first of all. I thought since your new album is called Evolution, it would be nice to hear from you what the evolution of electronic dance music looks like through your eyes. Because it's been 21 years since you first DJ'd, can you describe the sound of early 90s dance music?
Well, first of all, generally, I think it's fair to say that electronic music developed from a small subculture into the biggest music culture in the world. You can go wherever on this planet and you find people really loving this music and enjoying it. And the music in this sort of early 90s was obviously influenced by disco on one hand, so it's like, the whole sort of house movement was like very prominent, and also kind of like the new sort of sounds that came more from the, Klaus Schulze, like the real sort of like electronic, masterminds from the 70s. So their influences combined with the danceable aspect of what we know these days. This is what it sounded like in the early 90s.
Can you describe the sounds that come to mind, the beats, the rhythms, the melodies?
Well, everything back then was pretty much driven as well by the instruments and the machines we had, and two forefront sort of drum machines. One was the 808 and one was the famous 909, and so the 808 was more like the big sort of electro, like the big boomy bass drums and the tiny tingly hi-hats, and the tight sort of like banging straightforward stuff came from the 909. Then of course everybody knows about acid house, so it was like the 303, which was basically a bass playing synthesizer, and when you tweaked it, it made that weird acid noises. And also kind of like the first sort of keyboards that had actually phenomenal wide range of kind of like pad sounds, like the DX7 by Yamaha, so like really old keyboards. And of course it all combined with the old famous Atari ST1224 computer, which was always somewhat of a nightmare to work with. When you were in the middle of a production, you made sure it's on, because you could never really sort of know if it actually like gets back on the next day. So it was always an adventure.
Who were your heroes back then?
Actually, there was a guy that he seemed to have disappeared called Ron Allen, and he made some, really phenomenal electronic stuff in the sort of early 90s. I remember one EP called the Transcendental EP, which was kind of, I would say, early trance house sort of music, and I really liked that. But apparently he, I don't know, he disappeared. I don't know where he is.
You named all those machines and devices. What was the first equipment you used when you made your first track?
I had a Roland keyboard GX1, and because I didn't have a computer when I started, because I couldn't afford it, I basically, I was always having headphones on and then just like play a bass line, and then I tried to kind of, have the bass line running in my head like a sequencer machine, and then played keys on top. So this is how I kind of like composed my first pieces, and then obviously I went to the studio and switched everything on and then just played everything that I had in my head.
Yeah, had you been in studios of which you thought, wow, if I could one day have something like this, all this available?
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, in the beginning, I was, hooked up with co-producers. I learned a lot by a guy called Johnny Climack, which, meanwhile, he's like doing big movie scores in Hollywood. But he was the first sort of person that I learned a lot from, and yeah, it was always phenomenal to actually go to the studio and see all that. And I realized as well, because this is how I became, involved in production and actually really learning to play an instrument, was I always tried to explain what I had in my head. I always tried to kind of, it should sound like this, And I realized it's not possible. You cannot actually describe it. You have to do it yourself. So this is when I started learning all about studio equipment, all about engineering, all about actually composing music.
And when you started to gather your own equipment more and more, let's say the second half of the 90s, what was the gear that was most dear to you?
Well, obviously, it's like, all the famous machines like the 909, the 303, then Roland obviously had played a big role in the development of electronic music. Those drum machines I just mentioned, they all were by Roland. And I also had a Juno 60, which was like the big fat mama for bass lines. A Juno 106, which was really good for hooks and like little sequences. I remember another machine, GV1080, which was really, really good for, you know, all sorts of things that involve electronic music. And, you know, the Akai samplers, you know, for little, you know, vocal bits and pieces. It was quite a, you know, quite a setup.